What would happen if, for just one day, you could silence the constant noise in your mind? Have you ever imagined how much peace you could experience if you let go of the endless cycle of worry? The truth is, overthinking is exhausting. You're trying to carry burdens never meant for you. But here's the good news: God sees your struggles and knows the weight you bear. C.S. Lewis once said, "Relying on God has to begin all over again every day, as if nothing had yet been done. What if today was the day you let go, trusting that God is capable of holding the details you've been trying to manage?" The peace you seek is not in control, but in surrender. Stay with me. By the end of this message, you'll discover a simple, powerful truth: when you place your worries in God's hands, He gives you the rest you desperately need. Don't let another moment slip away consumed by anxious thoughts. God is inviting you to step into the freedom He offers, where overthinking no longer controls your life. There is hope. Let's find it together. When we delve into Matthew 11, verse 28 to 30, Jesus extends a profound invitation that often escapes us in the busyness of life. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." He's not just offering a temporary reprieve, He is inviting us to experience the freedom that comes from releasing our burdens into His hands. This invitation is not one of obligation, but one of relief, a call to step away from the weight of the world and embrace the peace found only in Him. Jesus assures us, "For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Yet, how often do we truly accept this offer? C.S. Lewis once reflected on the human condition, saying, "God cannot give us a happiness and peace apart from Himself, because it is not there." There is no such thing. These words echo the truth that peace is not found in our frantic efforts to control life, but in the act of surrendering to God. Overthinking, which so many of us fall into, becomes a barrier to the peace that Jesus promises. We convince ourselves that we can control our futures by thinking harder or worrying more, but in reality, this habit only heightens our exhaustion and distances us from the rest Jesus is offering. The more we try to manage every detail, the more drained we become. Overthinking creates an illusion of control, but it does nothing to change the outcome. In fact, it leaves us weary, robbed of joy and depleted of energy. Psalm 55 verse 22 offers an alternative: "Cast your burden on the Lord, and He will sustain you." The word "sustain" in this context is crucial. It speaks to God's ability to uphold, nourish, and strengthen us in ways we cannot do on our own. When we relinquish control to Him, we find that He not only holds us up, but He provides the wisdom and strength we need to face life's challenges. Fear is at the root of much of our overthinking. Fear of failure, fear of the unknown, or fear that if we're not constantly worrying, something crucial will slip through the cracks. Lewis wisely observed that no amount of anxiety makes any difference to anything that is going to happen. His words reflect a deep truth: overthinking does not prepare us for what's ahead, it only binds us to our current anxieties. When we dwell on our fears, we keep ourselves trapped in a cycle of worry, perpetually exhausted by thoughts that lead nowhere. But imagine the freedom that could come from breaking that cycle. What if, instead of turning the same concerns over in your mind, you handed them to God? What if you trusted that the Creator, who designed the universe in its perfect order, could guide your life better than you ever could? This act of surrender is not giving up. It is, in fact, a bold declaration of trust in the one who holds the world in His hands. It is through trust, not anxiety, that we find rest for our souls. Overthinking is a habit formed in a world that values self-sufficiency, but God calls us to something radically different: dependence on Him. When we learn to give up our relentless need to solve everything on our own, we make space for God's peace to fill our hearts. In releasing our burdens to Him, we gain the energy, clarity, and joy we've been missing. Today, reflect on where your mind has been dwelling. Are you replaying the same worries, hoping for a different result? Let today be the day you accept Jesus' invitation to rest, trusting that God's plan for your life is far better than anything you could devise. There is a powerful mystery woven into the fabric of spiritual warfare, one where the enemies of God's people are often blind to their own peril. They wander, unaware that their path of betrayal and malice has led them to a place of impending destruction. Their spiritual disconnect leaves them vulnerable, lost in a fog of pride and deceit, unable to see the devastating consequences of the seeds they have sown. Psalm 7 verse 15 speaks to this, saying, "Whoever digs a hole and scoops it out falls into the pit they have made." This paints a clear picture. The actions of the wicked, born out of treachery, lead them straight into the consequences they have tried to avoid. Yet, amid this unfolding judgment, a lifeline remains, one that you, in your steadfastness, can extend through the power of prayer. It is easy to feel justified in hoping for the downfall of those who have wronged you, but Scripture calls us to a higher path. Jesus in Luke 6 verse 27 to 28 commands, "Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, and pray for those who mistreat you." Here lies the paradox of divine love. Despite their transgressions, your prayers can unlock God's mercy for your enemies. C.S. Lewis once remarked, "We forgive others not because they deserve it, but because Christ first forgave us." Forgiveness and prayer are intertwined. By interceding for your enemies, you open the door to redemption, giving them the chance to experience God's transformative grace. It's not an easy task, but one that speaks to the immense power of mercy, a power that can soften even the hardest of hearts. Even as God's judgment unfolds, there remains a window of opportunity for those who seek repentance. The fate of your enemies is not fully sealed, for God is both just and merciful. His mercy endures forever, Psalm 136, and this truth should compel us to pray fervently for those who are spiritually lost. In these moments of prayer, we align ourselves with the heart of God, who desires all people to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. 1 Timothy 2 verse 4. There is hope even for the most hardened sinner, as God's mercy is vast and His patience long-suffering. However, we must not forget that time is a key element in the unfolding of God's justice. Your enemies may have believed they had escaped the consequences of their actions because no immediate judgment befell them. Ecclesiastes 8:11 reminds us, "When the sentence for a crime is not quickly carried out, people's hearts are filled with schemes to do wrong, but God's justice is neither delayed nor forgotten. It is meticulous, and the consequences they now face have been building over time, silently gathering like storm clouds waiting to break." The passage of time does not erase sin, but rather allows it to accumulate each unrepentant act, adding weight to the coming judgment. For those who refuse to turn from their ways, their suffering will intensify. The foundation of their lives, built on lies, betrayal, and rebellion, will crumble beneath them. Proverbs 16 verse 18 warns, "Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall." As they continue to resist God's mercy, their path will lead them into deeper torment. Every step away from. In the storms of life, we often search for a solid foundation to stand on, and Psalm 46 verse 1 offers a profound truth. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. This simple yet powerful verse reminds us that no matter how overwhelming our trials may seem, God is always near, ready to embrace us in His sheltering arms. In moments of distress, we often feel isolated, as if no one truly understands the depth of our pain. But God's presence is constant. He is not a distant observer, but an active refuge. We are encouraged to pause, breathe, and rest in His strength, allowing His peace to wash over us like a river that calms even the fiercest storms. The truth is, no matter how strong we try to be, we are not meant to carry life's burdens alone. There is beauty in acknowledging our weariness. In a world that often glorifies unrelenting strength and perseverance, we can forget that it's okay to be tired, to feel weak. God sees the weight we carry, and in His compassion, He invites us to lay down our burdens. In Matthew 11 verse 28, Jesus extends this invitation, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. This is not merely a call to physical rest, but a deep spiritual rejuvenation. There is no need to pretend that we are always capable of handling everything on our own. Our moments of weakness are opportunities to encounter God's grace in profound ways. He offers rest to our souls, a rest that renews us from the inside out. One of the most challenging aspects of faith is surrendering control. We often rely on our own understanding, striving to plan every step and solve every problem. But Proverbs 3 verse 5-6 urges us to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your path straight. It's a gentle but firm reminder that our perspective is limited. Trusting God doesn't mean that every step will be easy or that the path will always be clear, but it means surrendering our fears and our need for control. It means allowing God's wisdom, which far surpasses our own, to guide us even when we cannot see the whole picture. Faith is not about knowing the answers, it is about trusting the one who holds the answers. And trust doesn't come without difficulty. It can be hard to believe in a plan we cannot see. We are finite beings, limited by time, and we struggle with the unknown. We want to understand what God is doing and why. In moments of uncertainty, it feels as though God is silent or distant, but faith is trusting that He is working, even in the unseen. As C.S. Lewis eloquently noted, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is His megaphone to rouse a deaf world. Through our struggles, God refines us, molds us, and draws us closer to His heart. His silence is not absence, but a deep invitation to trust Him more fully. Just because we can't see Him working doesn't mean He isn't orchestrating something beautiful for our good. We find a profound example of this in the story of Joseph. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, and unjustly imprisoned, Joseph's life seemed to be marked by one tragedy after another. Yet despite his suffering, Joseph remained faithful, trusting that God had a greater plan. Genesis 50 verse 20 captures the essence of Joseph's faith when he declares to his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." God used Joseph's trials to position him as a leader who would ultimately save an entire nation from famine. What looked like senseless suffering was actually part of God's divine plan. Joseph's story teaches us that, even when others mean harm, God can turn every situation for good. This brings us to the heart of faith, believing that God's plans are always for our good, even when they involve pain or delay. It's about trusting that He is weaving every thread of our lives into a tapestry that we cannot yet see in full. As Romans 8 verse 28 reminds us, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. We may not understand why we face certain challenges, but we can rest in the assurance that God is with us, guiding us through each step. We lift our hearts to God, who remains faithful through every season. He is our refuge in times of trouble, our strength when we are weak, and our guide when we feel lost. His plans are always for our good, and even when the path seems uncertain, we trust that His love will never fail. God has guided countless souls before us, and He will continue to lead those in need. Let us lean into His presence, trusting that He is working all things together for our good, and find peace in knowing that He holds our future securely in His hands. In life, we often face trials that seem too overwhelming to bear, leaving us questioning their purpose. Yet, like Joseph, whose journey from betrayal to leadership was part of a greater divine plan, we are reminded that every challenge serves a higher purpose. Romans 8 verse 28 assures us, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. Even in the midst of suffering, God is weaving together every thread of our lives for a greater good, though we may not immediately understand it. Joseph, sold into slavery by his own brothers, endured years of hardship. Yet God used these trials to position him as a leader who would ultimately save his family and many others. In the same way, our struggles may seem unfair or confusing, but they are instrumental in shaping the greater narrative God has for our lives. Trusting in God's plan is no easy task. It requires more than blind faith. It calls us to surrender our understanding and embrace the wisdom of the one who sees the bigger picture. Proverbs 3 verse 5-6 emphasizes this trust, saying, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight." Trust in God does not mean we will have all the answers, but it does mean that we acknowledge his sovereignty, knowing that his plans surpass our own. This act of trust invites God's infinite wisdom, power, and love into our lives, strengthening us for the journey ahead. C.S. Lewis once noted, "Faith is the art of holding on to things in spite of your changing moods and circumstances, a poignant reminder that trust is steadfast, not swayed by life's storms." One of the most challenging aspects of trust is letting go of our need for control. We often believe that if we can just manage every detail, we will ensure the outcome we desire. Yet true trust in God involves releasing our grip on control and allowing him to guide us. This echoes Jesus' call in Matthew 6 verse 34 to live in the present. "Therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself." Each day has enough trouble of its own. By surrendering the need to orchestrate every outcome, we free ourselves from anxiety and rest in God's promises. This release is not passive, but an active choice to entrust God with each step of the journey, without needing to see the entire path ahead. Surrendering to God also means handing over our anxieties. Philippians 4 verse 6-7 provides us with a roadmap. "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." We often hold on tightly to our worries, convinced that if we don't, everything will fall apart. But God's peace, which surpasses human understanding, comes when we release our burdens to him in prayer, trusting that he will carry them for us. This divine exchange, our anxieties for his peace, is a gift we must learn to embrace daily. Peace through surrender does not imply a life free of responsibility or care. Rather, it signifies that we no longer bear the weight of the outcome. We do our part, but we leave the results to God. His peace acts as a shield, guarding our hearts and minds from the fears and doubts that often creep in. As C.S. Lewis wisely observed, relying on God has to begin all over again every day, as if nothing had yet been done. Each morning, we must choose once again to lay down our worries and pick up God's peace, trusting that he is at work, even when we cannot see it. We must remember that God is the one who sustains all things. It is not our efforts that keep the world turning or hold our lives together, but God's divine power. Colossians 1 verse 17 reminds us he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. When we release control, we are not abandoning our responsibilities, but acknowledging that God holds the universe, and therefore he holds us. He is not surprised by our circumstances or overwhelmed by the challenges we face. Instead, he invites us to rest in the assurance that he is in control. Every difficulty we face carries a greater purpose, though it may not always be clear in the moment. By trusting in God's plan, surrendering control, and releasing our anxieties to him, we open ourselves to his peace, which surpasses all understanding. As we journey through life's trials, may we be reminded that God is the one who holds all things together, guiding us with love and wisdom through every step. We give thanks to God, for his guidance is unwavering, and his plan for our lives is always for our good, even when we cannot see it clearly. Surrendering to God is not an act of giving up or neglecting responsibility. Rather, it is a profound acknowledgement of our limitations and a willingness to trust in his infinite strength. In our human frailty, We often struggle with burdens we are not meant to carry alone. But surrendering does not symbolize failure, it is a declaration of humility and faith. Just as Jesus said in Matthew 11, verse 28, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Surrender opens the door for divine intervention, inviting God to step into situations that surpass our ability to control. Surrender becomes a sacred act of relinquishing control, allowing God to work in His perfect timing and wisdom. In surrendering, we embrace daily humility, not as a one-time decision, but as a continual practice of laying our worries, anxieties, and uncertainties at God's feet. Each morning presents a new opportunity to hand over the unseen struggles and the pressing burdens of life to the one who holds the world in His hands. C.S. Lewis reminds us, the more we let God take us over, the more truly ourselves we become. This echoes the truth that surrendering doesn't diminish who we are, it allows God to reveal the truest, most powerful version of ourselves through His strength. God's strength is most evident in our weakness. Paul's words in 2 Corinthians 12, verse 9, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness," reflect this profound reality. When we admit our limitations and weaknesses, we make room for God to showcase His power. It is in these moments of surrender, where we admit our inability to handle life's pressures, that God's grace steps in, granting us peace and strength to carry on. Our vulnerability becomes the very space where God can perform miracles and lift us from the depths of our struggles. Trusting God with the uncontrollable aspects of our lives is a practice of deep faith. We may not always see the immediate results of our surrender, but we are assured of His hand at work, orchestrating everything for our good. Romans 8, verse 28 reminds us, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him." This trust in His unseen work allows us to experience a peace that transcends understanding, as Philippians 4, verse 7 promises. Even when we cannot see the outcome, we know that His hand is guiding every detail, far beyond what human hands can accomplish. When we place our lives in God's hands, we discover the lightness of trust and the freedom of release. This act of faith does not absolve us of responsibility, but it grants us the assurance that we are not alone in the journey. As we trust in God's perfect plan, we find relief from the weight we once carried, knowing that His shoulders are far broader than ours. Through surrender, we are reminded that His ways are higher, His thoughts greater, and His care for us beyond measure. In many ways, God's love is much like the love of a parent, but infinitely greater. Just as a loving father wouldn't allow his child to carry a burden too heavy for them, so God, in His infinite wisdom and compassion, doesn't expect us to bear the weight of life's challenges alone. It's a powerful reminder that the one who created the universe desires to carry the heaviest burdens for us, inviting us to cast our anxieties upon Him. As parents lovingly guide their children, God's love leads us to peace and rest. This concept is beautifully illustrated in Isaiah 41, verse 10, where God promises, "Fear not, for I am with you, be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." This verse is a profound assurance that God's hand is mightier than any fear we face. In a world where anxieties about the future, work pressures, and concerns for our loved ones often weigh us down, God extends His hand, offering strength far beyond what we could ever muster on our own. His promise is not just to help us survive, but to help us thrive in the midst of our struggles. C.S. Lewis once said, "Relying on God has to begin all over again, every day, as if nothing had yet been done." This call to daily surrender is central to the Christian life. Each morning, we must actively place our worries, fears, and uncertainties in God's hands, trusting that He is not only capable but also willing to handle them perfectly. Lewis's wisdom underscores the reality that peace comes not from our ability to control every situation, but from our willingness to let go and trust in God's perfect plan. Like a child who feels safe when their father holds their hand, We too find true safety when we surrender our lives to God's care. Yet, how often do we struggle to release our burdens, holding onto them out of fear or mistrust? God, knowing our human tendencies, invites us gently and persistently to give Him all that troubles us. 1 Peter 5 verse 7 encourages us, "Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you." This is a reminder that God's care is intimate and personal. He sees the specific details of your life, the sleepless nights, the mounting pressure at work, the worries about your children, and He wants to lift those from your shoulders. There is nothing too big or too small for His attention. The act of casting our burdens is not a one-time event, but a continual process of trust, surrender, and belief in God's faithfulness. When we choose to hand over our fears and worries, something miraculous happens. Peace enters our hearts. This peace isn't one we can create by ourselves. It is a gift from God, one that surpasses understanding. As described in Philippians 4 verse 7, "And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus." The kind of peace God offers is deeper than the temporary relief we find in worldly distractions or self-reliance. It is the peace that comes from knowing the Creator of all things is actively working for our good, even when we can't see it. This peace doesn't mean the absence of trouble, but rather the presence of God in the midst of it. True rest, as the Bible reminds us in Hebrews 4 verse 10, is not merely about physical relaxation, but about spiritual surrender. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from His. The writer of Hebrews is speaking of a deeper rest, the kind that comes when we stop striving to control every outcome and begin to trust fully in God's plan. Spiritual rest is the gift that comes when we step back and allow God to be God in our lives. It's acknowledging that He is in control and that His ways, though sometimes mysterious, are always higher and better than ours. This surrender leads to a profound realization. Colossians 1 verse 17 tells us that He is before all things, and in Him all things hold together. The weight of the world doesn't rest on our shoulders, it rests securely in God's hands. This truth liberates us from the pressure to carry everything on our own, reminding us that God's sovereignty encompasses every detail of our lives. The world is not ours to control or fix. It is sustained by the one who has been faithful from the beginning of time and will continue to be faithful forever. But what does this rest and peace look like in real life? It doesn't mean that our problems disappear overnight or that life becomes easy. Rather, it means that we no longer face these challenges alone. God's presence brings a peace that endures through uncertainty, joy in the midst of trials, and a deep trust that He is working all things together for our good. Romans 8 verse 28. In this divine rest, we find hope, even when circumstances remain difficult, because we know that God is with us. As C.S. Lewis insightfully said, "God, who foresaw your tribulation, has specially armed you to go through it, not without pain, but without stain." This quote beautifully captures the essence of God's love and guidance. While life's challenges may leave their marks, they cannot tarnish the soul that rests in God's care. His grace is sufficient, His love is unending, and His power is more than enough to carry us through. The rest we find in God is not an escape from life's difficulties, but a place of refuge and renewal within them. It's a rest that comes from knowing that while we may not always understand the path ahead, the one who holds the stars also holds us. And in that, we can find peace, joy, and strength to face whatever comes our way, knowing that God's love never fails and His promises endure forever. In the journey of life, we often need to be reminded of God's unwavering faithfulness. Time and again, as we reflect on our past, we see the hand of God guiding, providing, and protecting us in ways we might not have realized at the time. His promises are not fleeting, they endure through every season. And this calls us to rest in His faithfulness for the future. As C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Relying on God has to begin all over again every day as if nothing had yet been done." Trust is not a passive act, but an active surrender, a daily choice to lean into His Word and His promises. Resting in God doesn't mean sitting idly by. It means choosing prayer over worry and focusing our minds on His truth instead of letting negative thoughts consume us. In Philippians 4 verse 8, we are encouraged to meditate on what is true, noble, right, pure, and admirable. This is not just advice, it's a lifeline to inner peace, guiding our hearts to experience the peace of God. When we align our thoughts with God's Word, we actively rest in Him, finding solace in the assurance that He is in control. Trusting in God's timing and His plans is an essential part of this rest. Romans 8 verse 28 reminds us that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him. This powerful truth calls us to relinquish our grip on outcomes, knowing that His love and wisdom will bring about what is best for us, even when we can't see it immediately. During difficult times, Psalm 46:1 echoes the promise that God is our refuge and strength, always present in our troubles. He invites us to lay down our burdens and take up His yoke, which is light and filled with grace. We are called to cast all our worries and fears upon the Lord, trusting that He knows our every need. The act of releasing our burdens to God is not one of defeat but of victory, for His love sustains us. Through prayer, we release these burdens, and in return, receive His peace, knowing that His plans are far better than we can imagine. We are encouraged to share this message of hope and rest with others. As we experience the peace of God, let us be vessels of His love, encouraging those around us to hold on to faith, knowing that God's peace will meet them in every circumstance.